All right, everyone, welcome to Science Colloquium. We just have just a few announcements. We only have one Science Colloquium left at this time. We'll be at NBC students come out and support them. They'll be doing a poster presentation along with the poster session before they do their Science Colloquium talk. So it'll be very lively, very fun. So make sure you come out to that on November 19th. We do have a maps presentation coming up on the 24th. So we need to check out that. There's only a few of these talks left for this semester. So don't miss out on these opportunities. And then of course we have our science nights through the Great Valley Museum with the information on the side of the hours for the Great Valley Museum. And I will pull up our presentation for today. And I will pass it over to Guy Van Koenig. Okay,
Thank you. Yeah. Well, good afternoon and thanks for coming. Can you hear me in the back? I guess, am I mic'd up? Okay. So I put the second part of the title on there in case people didn't know what a cetacean was. And we'll start out by defining some terms, and then I'll make sure we all understand what an evolutionary trend is. And after that, we'll get into just a general review of modern whales, and then we'll evolve them and hopefully the whales, and you'll see the root word in there. The ancient whales are the Archaeoceti being plural, and they're extinct, but they gave rise to the two modern groups, the Mystaceti, baleen whales, and the Odontoceti, toothed whales. Odont means tooth, and mist means mustache. These are the baleen whales, kind of looks like a mustache, I guess. So I'll probably use those terms interchangeably. Back to my fluke. This is humpback whale UDC 0483. It's been sighted 6 times. The first time was down in Manzanillo, Mexico, and that's me. I had the 4th sighting up there near the field station in the Gulf of California. A lot of the whales are on a registry, particularly the humpback whales, and the patterns on the fluke are like a fingerprint. So if you get a photograph, get the fluke, and you can, the gender, the sex of this whale is unknown. It's fairly a new one on the registry. Okay, an evolutionary trend is a sequential change in usually structure over time. The change could be physiological or behavioral, but those things don't fossilize well. So we usually talk about structural changes. The classic example, one that you've probably all seen if you've taken a biology course, is horse evolution. And there's some trends we'll talk about, and you can see in the picture where we start off with a dog-sized multi-toed browser turns into the larger single-toed grazer. It took about 50 million years. Interesting, that's about the same time span for the whale evolution. But the thing that's concerned me about these kind of diagrams is that evolution does not proceed in a linear fashion. I like the diagram on the, do I have a pointer of some kind? Oh, this, can you see that? I like this diagram better because if you look at periods, like here at this particular time here in the late Miocene, we got 1, 2, maybe 3, 4, maybe 5 different horses existing side by side. At one time, there's as many as 12 kinds on planet Earth of horses. And so that it's not a linear thing, it's a branching. And in fact, we like to use a tree diagram to talk about evolution. And if you follow some of the branches, you see some of them split and some of them fuse, some of them die out. And we're here at the end of the line, which is the present time. And that present time could have been back in the day when there are 12 different kinds of horses. The other thing that concerns me about this kind of diagram is we tend to call these ancestral forms, tend to call them primitive, which is a bad word, because they weren't primitive in any sense of the word. They were fully developed, fully sophisticated mammals in every way, and they were perfectly adapted to the conditions at the time. So we hesitate to use the word primitive. Ancestral is a much better word. So avoid that thinking linearly, that linear thinking, and avoid calling any of the intermediate forms primitive. So if we look at horses one more time before we leave them, you can see 4 major trends. If you look at this column here, both feet, we start off with 4 toes and end up with 1. Another trend is the length of the long bones, gets longer legged, larger size, and probably one of the most important trends is change in dentition. I don't know if you ever looked in a horse's mouth, but they have really interesting teeth. They're like files. And that is an adaptation for their new grazing lifestyle, which appeared later in their evolution. So that's what a trend is, a series of structural changes over time. Doesn't have to be structural, but usually is. And we can do diagrams. I think they're prettier than horses, don't you? For whales. And again, we'll be talking more about our first fossil whale, and we'll look at some of the intermediates. Backtrack a little bit. Whales are mammals. Almost 6,000 species of mammals, very successful group. As you probably know, again, if you've had biology, mammals have hair and mammary glands. Those are the 2 major characteristics. If it doesn't have hair, it's not a mammal. Or I should say only mammals have hair. The whales have lost a lot of their hair. They breathe air. This is one we could pay attention to. They're endothermic, which means they keep an elevated body temperature. They generate their own heat. They don't have to go find a hot rock to sit on. And that takes energy. So they have a high metabolic rate. Mammals tend to have a high metabolic rate, and they have an efficient circulation with their 4-chambered heart to help deal with that high metabolic rate. This is another one we could probably pay attention to. They have 4 kinds of teeth. Not so apparent when we smile, but if you look at your dog or cat, it's very apparent there are different kinds of teeth. And 2 sets. That's a mammal characteristic. I will argue, hopefully convince you that cetaceans are the most modified mammals from their ancestral form to the present one. And this picture shows Pachycetus, which is the first whale. We'll be seeing more of it, and a modern dolphin. Look at some of the things that have happened, some of these trends that we're talking about. Loss of hind limbs, and of course the hair. The nares, or the nostrils, have migrated from the tip of the snout, as it is in most mammals, to the very top of the skull. The forelimbs have been modified into flippers. You can see in the diagram all the same bony elements that we have, but these elements are flattened and fused into a flipper. They have blubber. Blubber is a specialized adaptation. It's not just fat. It's a mixture of fat and connective tissue. It serves to a number of roles. One of the most important ones is it gives cetaceans that hydrodynamic shape. That's super, it's called a fusiform shape, low drag body shape. They have extra vertebrae. I was just asked if I could identify a whale vertebra that they have here, and not a chance in the world. I mean, I could say it's a whale, but which whale? They have a lot of vertebrae, extra. One of the key things I'll be talking about is the underwater ear. Hearing underwater is different than hearing in the air, requires different structures. One of the problems, if you're in the water and a sound wave hits your skull, you have no idea where it came from. Could come from anywhere. And so early on, these little mammals that spent time in the water separated their ear receiving area from the rest of their skull. It was isolated. I'll show you some examples of that. And that shows up really well in the fossil record. It's a real good clue that this animal lived in water. Dentition changes. Remember I talked about how mammals have the 4 different kinds of teeth? Not anymore. Cetaceans have small, or not necessarily small, but a lot of, or very few, conical teeth. And they're not different. So a number of trends that have occurred. The two groups are different. Remember, the archaeocetes are extinct, but the two groups we have, the baleen whales and the toothed whales, are different in a number of ways. The toothed whales more diverse. Look at the species number, 73, compared to only 14 baleen whales. Baleen whales tend to be larger in size. You've heard of the blue whale, largest animal to have ever lived. They're batch feeders, which means they, hey, Jackson, they feed like you and I eat rice, not one at a time. They feed on batch prey. They have this interesting lifestyle, feast and fast. Often baleen whales migrate to the high latitudes to take advantage of the long summer days and feast. And then they migrate to warmer climates where they fast to calve and mate. They're weaned very quickly. Mom doesn't hang out with calf, or calf doesn't hang out with mom for very long. In contrast, you can look at the list. The toothed whales tend to be smaller, exception being the sperm whale. They go after individual prey, which they use echolocation for. Echolocation is using sound to find prey or navigate. They produce sound pulses which are reflected off their food or the environment, and they come back and they analyze the return to get an auditory picture. I want to pause here for a second because you and I do not appreciate that our brain sees, our eyes do not. So when you look, the only thing that your eyes do is send impulses to the back of the brain. That brain interprets those images and creates this mental picture. Is it real? Good question. It's a creation of your brain. And what we need to appreciate is that we could also create an auditory picture, maybe just as vivid as our visual one. So bats and these toothed whales most likely can do this. And we'll talk later about the large brain size of some of the toothed whales, and most likely some of that's due to processing this auditory information. Their movements are less predictable, and they often have these extended maternal offspring relationships. You've probably heard of killer whales. The sons never leave their mother's side. Well, her influence anyway. And pilot whales can nurse for 16 years. So there's this really involved relationship. Interesting, different. In fact, these differences were so great that at one time, so I'll just want to put them in 2 different orders. But as it turns out, all the molecular evidence shows that they are related. They have a common ancestor, in spite of those differences. So some of the toothed whales would be, I just put some things you might recognize: dolphins, porpoises, killer whales. You may have heard of sperm whales, beaked whales. So the screen on the right here's some of the toothed whales. There's a sperm whale. That's the largest toothed whale. And here's our killer whale for comparison. I put these over here. These are good because people ask me the difference between a porpoise and a dolphin. And this illustrates it well. You can see that this porpoise has a blunt snout, Dolphins usually have a beak. Porpoises have a nice triangular dorsal fin. Dolphins have a sickle-like dorsal fin. And their dentition is different. These conical teeth here are from a dolphin skull. And porpoises have these spade-like teeth. And that reflects a different diet. Porpoises tend to be more cold water adapted. They're not quite as social. But that's the difference. And I took time to do this because I hear people say whales, dolphins, and porpoises. And I'm thinking, why say dolphins? They're all whales. So just say whales. When we say whales, we're including them as well. Okay, let's look at the baleen whales. I'm going to divide them into 3 groups for you: the rorquals, the rights and bowheads, and the gray whales. And this is kind of a neat split because it reflects different ways they feed. Remember, they're all batch feeders. Baleen whales have baleen. I brought them in. It's a small piece, but some whales, like bowheads and right whales, have baleen that's 10 feet long, if you can picture that. It's made of keratin, the same protein that your fingernails are made of. If you look real closely at it, it does resemble a fingernail. The inner edge, you can see in the slide, is the one toward the inner mouth. The tongue is fringed. And of course, they take mouthfuls of water, hopefully with food suspended. And then using their big tongue, they push that water through the baleen and filter. So it's just trap the small organisms. And you can see when these things are together, side by side, it makes a really nice filtering mechanism. So baleen whales have baleen. Here's a fin whale. You can see the baleen. Many, 400 or so of these plates. Can you imagine having 400 fingernails hanging around from the roof of your mouth? And here's a fin whale too. And the rorqual whales I mentioned all have that pleated throat and belly area, upper belly area, which they expand when they feed. And here's one doing that. So these are all rorquals. They all have, there's a bunch of different ones. And this is a right whale and a bowhead. The third kind of whale would be our own California state marine mammal, would be gray whales. And they are fun to interact with, as you can see. I'll tell you a gray whale story at the end of my talk. So the different ways they feed, some of the things they feed on, what this slide up here leaves out is schooling fish. A lot of them feed on schooling fish, small schooling fish. But probably the smallest food item would be copepods. And that requires really long, fine baleen. And then there's these are all different kinds of crustaceans. Euphausids are krill, and you can get an idea of the size. A centimeter is a little less than a half an inch. So a krill is about yay big. Some of these things occur in vast swarms, which these baleen whales take advantage of. They find them without echolocation, possibly by sound or even taste in the water. So the different feeding styles I mentioned, skimming. So right whales and bowheads skim. They stay on the surface, swim along slowly, and just let water into their mouth and go out through their baleen and swallow occasionally. Whereas the rorquals do either engulfing or lunging. I usually don't separate these two feeding styles. It's basically open your mouth and take a couple swimming pools full of water, and then you gotta. Can you imagine swimming along and then creating that drag and almost come to a complete stop? And I've watched them do this. It's pretty interesting. And then the gray whale, the third feeding style. So if we call skimming as one and just call this both similar lunging, they bottom grub. They put their face in the mud and suck in mud and material and filter out the amphipods that are in those areas. I looked at this picture when I first saw this picture, and I thought it's inaccurate because this is showing this whale doing it on the left side. Most gray whales are right-sided. And that's known because the baleen is worn more on that side. Okay, whales belong to the order Artiodactyla. And artio means even, and dactyla means toes. So the artiodactylans are the hoofed animals with even toes. It includes, as you can see in the picture, what we've got deer and sheep and hippos. It includes giraffes, cattle, antelopes. They're all artiodactylans. This is the order in which whales are. And the main evidence for that, well, there's molecular evidence. And molecular evidence means we can look at the DNA, or we can look at proteins. And no matter what you look at, what kind of molecule you pick, you can come up with a relationship like you see here. You can see here from this diagram that whales' closest living relatives are hippos. They share the most common DNA, common cytochrome proteins. And they're also linked with all other artiodactylans. And sign genes are one thing that paleontologists use to determine, or just biologists use to determine phylogenetic relationships between who's related to who. It's called phylogeny. We can construct these trees. What you should take away from here is that hippos are our close relatives, and that whales are also related to all other even-toed mammals. One of the keys to that relationship is the astragalus. I have here the astragalus that's in the photograph. This is such a cool bone, I'm going to pass it around. And the thing that makes the astragalus unique is it has a double pulley. Only artiodactylans have this bone. We have this bone, but it's not a double pulley. So have a look at that. This is from a moose, by the way. It's cool, huh? So it turns out Archaeocetes, the ancestral whales, had a double pulley astragalus. And if you look at some of the other Artiodactyla, you can see they're all different, double pulleyed. These are all here's Pachycetus, that's our first whale, and llamas, these are actually llamas. I think this is deer, there's hippo, and this is pig. Now, you may wonder how I can jump from an ankle bone to a marine reptile, a Cretaceous marine reptile. And I needed to stick these guys in here because they're crucial. If it wasn't for that big rock that slammed into the earth about 66 million years ago, whales would have never made it because their spot was occupied by apex predators, such as a plesiosaurus. And another apex predator at the same time would be the mosasaurs. And I saw this skull when I came to Science Day last October 3rd, and I was just, whoa, I said, Gary, I got to borrow that skull. This is a mosasaur. And you can imagine any small mammal that wanted to go for a swim could be discouraged. I was also attracted to the skull because the teeth are very cetacean-like. See those conical teeth? In fact, if it had a little bigger brain case, I would have called it an archaeocete. See those very simple, they're all the same, very conical-like. So this is the mosasaur. There are also these, not to mention, there are also these giant marine crocodiles would have made life miserable for. I have a plesiosaur in my living room, thanks to Richard Avant, who assembled this thing. And also when I ran across this good idea for a Halloween costume. I'll give you the link if you want it. You can become a mosasaur for Halloween. And you'll know all of the hopefully would get recognized by the biologists anyway. So we had to get rid of those guys, and I guess fortunately for the mammals, a big asteroid took out 75% of all things living, certainly the non-avian dinosaurs and the marine reptiles. Left the ocean wide open, basically. If we look back at the beginning of whale evolution, we have to go back about 50 million years ago. You can see the continents were still not in their present position. And the area that okay, monosaurs settle down. If you look at this area here between Europe and Africa and Asia, this is called the Tethys Sea. And this is where, of all places of the planet, this is where the Archaeocete fossils were discovered. And it was a shallow sea. There's not much left of it today, maybe parts of the Mediterranean, the Caspian Sea, the Black Sea remnants. But it's closed as continents moved. So today, the Tethys Sea occupies parts of India and Pakistan and Nepal. Okay, so probably the best candidate for our artiodactylan ancestor is a group called the rhaelids. And one of them is, that you see here, is Endohyus. And he's like a little deer, had hooves. He had an astragalus. The big clue that Endohyus spent some time in the water are these osteosclerotic limb bones. Now, osteo is bone, sclera means thickening. And you see in this picture here on the right, you can see this is the cross section through a long bone. Look how thick the bony wall is. Where I tried to find a corresponding picture of a cat. This is the best, like here's a radiograph of a cat. So look at the difference, the thickness of the. And so why would a animal that spent time in the water want to have autosclerotic bones? Did you ever try to walk on the bottom? It's a lot easier if you're denser. And that's one of the interpretations. They also had this tympanic bulla, which I'll show you in a second, that had this little ridge called an involucrum, which is characteristic of cetaceans. Now, you guys know, you've heard of isotopes, right? Different forms of the same atom. There's a couple of stable isotopes of oxygen, and their ratio is indicative of what that animal ate. So whatever it ate, those isotopes are locked into their enamel and in their bones, and they can be analyzed and get some clue as to the diet and also the environment. And it turns out that Endohyus drank fresh water and was a plant eater. Another clue that it ate plants that had four cusp teeth with four cusps. If you look at your molars, you can see you have four cusps on top. They're little bumps on your teeth called cusps. And so it's not a whale. Whales don't eat plants, but it had a couple of cetacean clues like those thick bones and that bulla that I told you about. I'm going to show you some so you can understand that. Okay, so I have a couple skulls here. This skull, which is in the picture, shows in tympanic bulla, which is right here, that swelling. It looks like a really smooth, and it's attached firmly to the skull. And I remember one of the things that help you here underwater is to get that bulla not attached to the skull. And that's why if we look at a dolphin skull, where's the bulla? It's gone, because it was attached not like it is in us, but attached with a fatty pad. So here's this dolphin skull, and you can see the spot where the bulla would be, but it's gone because they have a fully underwater ear where that middle ear is totally isolated from the rest of the skull. Here's the tympanic bulla of a whale. You can see that involucrum, that heavy ridge. And that heavy ridge is only found in cetaceans. And so I remember we have this little deer-like critter that had a couple of cetacean features, but it was a plant eater. And so it's one of the better candidates as the predecessor to the whales. So meet Pachycetus. What's Pachy? Do you know what that refers to? Some of you know. Pakistan. And so it's the Pakistan whale, which is discovered in 1983 in Pakistan. Pachycetus, a little bigger, wolf-sized. The orbits are on top of the skull. Sort of evidence that maybe it spent some time on the bottom looking up. It had the osteosclerotic bones I told you about, the thick bones. Isotope evidence indicated that Pachycetus was pretty much freshwater. But here's the key thing that makes it a cetacean. There was a diet change. It has a 3-cusp teeth, and the isotopes indicated it was a fish eater. So now we've got a true whale now, because now we've got a carnivore that's got an involucrum on its bulla, and it's got the heavy bones. So this is considered our first fossil whale. You can see quite a bit of the skeletal material was discovered. And if you can look at this picture, this is Indohyus. You can see the 4 cusps, and we move to Pachycetus, you can see there are 3 cusps. 1, 2, 3, and 4 over here. Change in diet makes it a whale. Here's Pachycetus. I like this conception of, I mean, all you have are the bones. It's anybody's guess whether it was fully furred or kind of naked like a hippo. and then here's the astragalus down here. Number 1 is from Pachycetus. Number 2 is from a pig, and you guys are looking at the moose one going around. Okay, another ancestral form that came out a little bit later was Ambulocetus. What's ambulate mean? This is the walking whale. Little larger. It had a lot of caudal vertebrae and suggested that it did an up and down undulation. The eyes were more lateral, and the isotope ratio, oxygen isotope ratio, suggested that it spent some time in salt water. So we're moving into an estuary situation. So that's Ambulocetus, very famous, and again, excellent fossils. And this guy was discovered in 1991. And I'm hoping to see all that horse stuff in textbooks replaced by all this good cetacean. Okay, another estuarine whale is this Remnian toncetids. Cuchacetus was one, long tail. What's interesting about Cuchacetus was that no longer are we crushing food, we're just catching it like modern whales do, modern toothed whales. And it had a huge mandibular foramen. And I'll show you that. Let's look at the next slide. Okay, the mandibular foramen is this opening in the jaw. Here's this raccoon skull, mandible, and this is the inside. There's a little foramen. Foramen means hole. There's a little hole here for nerves and vessels. If you ever had dental work done on the lower jaw, that's where they want to stick the Novocaine, right next to that hole. And it'll take out the whole lower half. Feels like you're drinking out of a square glass, right? And that's great. It's much better to have lower teeth worked on than upper, because it only takes one shot. You take out the whole side. Compare that mandibular foramen with the mandibular foramen of a dolphin, this was found in Cuchacetus, this next group. And so there's a big fat pad here, again, to isolate the sound, which the whales use their mandible, their lower jaw, like we use our external ears as the sound reception area. So that's this guy. Anything else we should? Oh yeah, semicircular canals. This is way cool. I don't know if those are in our ear. They're in our ear. There are three of them, and we use them to detect rotation and roll, pitch, and yaw, the three movements. So that's how you know whether you're spinning or whether your head's going, up or down or side. Anyway, they're in our inner ear. They're surrounded by bone, so they fossilize. Well, it turns out that this group had reduced semicircular canals. It makes sense if you're diving and swimming around, you don't want to get dizzy. Not so important for a marine creature as it would be for a terrestrial one. Again, good solid anatomical clues that this animal was living in the water. I saw this slide when I was looking at my stuff. It's a mandible, and I just thought you'd be appreciated. This is the second largest bone in the world. Belongs to a fin whale. It's half of a mandible. If it had a blue whale mandible, it would be a little bit bigger. And anyway, this is big whale bone. Okay, Rhodocetus. We're up to as late as 40 million years ago. The key to Rhodocetus was it was no longer confined to Tethys Sea area, but found worldwide. The nares, the nasal openings, are now mid-snout instead of being on the end. So we have that trend. The nares migration trend is going on. This one about the sacrum, you and I, our sacrum is fused. It's back here, 5 bones fused together. Unfused, and the pelvis only attached to one of this. It may even shows that they're increasing the ability to use that tail as a up and down movement. Still had hooves, little hooves, sort of a holdover from our didactyl ancestor. And did the astragalus make it all the way around? Thank you. And so Rhodocetus this group probably still wasn't fully aquatic because they have a fossil with 90% of the bones were found. That's unbelievable to have that complete of a fossil. And there was a female with a full-term fetus. And the fetus was head down, which is like most terrestrial mammals. But in whales, are born breech, because the last thing you want to come out is the blowhole. And so since the fetus was head down, it was concluded that Rhodoceus probably had to crawl out on land. Not well, but enough to give birth. So didn't quite make it. So the last group, and we're up to 34 million years ago, we're moving up in time. These guys had the blowhole all the way. It's a big group, the basilosaurids. You might question the name Sora, as you know, means lizard. And that's because the first fossil, they thought it was a marine reptile. It turns out it was a whale. And some of them were large. By now, we have no pelvis connection. They still had little limb bones. Probably a fluke. And the evidence for that is, I may get to, has to do with the bones in the caudal bones. And some were large. So this is the basilosaurs, a big group, 7 genera. That means in each genus would have number of species. Remember that tree? Lots of different things going on. And this just shows, here's some skulls of an early whale on the left. And here's this is a basilosaurid, actually, and you can see the nasal openings working its way up until finally the very top of the skull, as it is in this dolphin skull. We're not there yet. Close. Something had to happen, and this is huge. And so in the late Oligocene, about 38 million years ago, the southern continents finally broke up and established the Antarctic circumpolar current. So before this current was not possible because, as you may know, that South America and Antarctica and Australia and we're all connected. And this current changed the water circulation in all the ocean basins. We went from a warm, not terribly productive situation to mixing, which brings nutrients up. And you can see this in the fossil records because once this current was established, there was an explosion of diatoms. And I put some diatoms in there, one of our favorite little phytoplankton guys. Here's some diatoms here. I like this one, looks like a wagon wheel. This one looks like one of those little peanut candies that we used to eat. Those are diatoms. You get a lot of diatoms because you have more colder nutrient waters. You get a lot of little animal guys that eat the diatoms. And of course, this was a great food supply, which caused the radiation of both groups. When we say radiation, it means an expansion of the number of species in different kinds. So it was basically just an explosion of cetaceans, both toothed and, well, there weren't mysticetes at this time, mostly toothed, just toothed whales exploded. And one of the earliest evidences of a toothed whale that used echolocation is this squalodon. And he had a telescoped skull. And what that means is that the bones that hold your teeth are the maxilla and the premaxilla. We don't have one, but other mammals do. And they were just telescoped forward. So, and there's this little depression here where a little thing called a melon, which helps to focus the sound pulses. There's some asymmetry here. I don't know if you can see that. Asymmetry means it's the right and left side are not the same. Only mammalian skull that has that asymmetry would be odontocetes. So squalodon, good evidence that it used echolocation. And it probably wasn't very good, but when you're going after these nautiloids, pretty good target for echolocation. These were the shelled, like the shelled nautilus or shelled squids. You probably heard about them. There were a lot of them back in the day, and the perfect target for echolocation. And what's interesting, if you look at this toothed whale frequency here, you can see right about 38 million years ago, there's an explosion of odontocetes and a decrease in nautiloids. Think there's a connection? Perhaps. Also a decrease in squid, another food item of the odontocetes, the toothed whales. So the mysticetes developed baleen, again, about this time. The big question is, did the baleen come from a toothless ancestor? Could it have been a toothed whale that lost its teeth, like a suction feeder, and developed baleen? Or did the baleen come from a toothed whale? And there's evidence for both. There is a fossil, this Atiocetus weltoni, had teeth and baleen. And once you get baleen going, you can see with all those diatoms and their feeders in the water, plenty of food. All your ancestors will be successful. I talked about big brains, and you can see if you look at brain size, of course, fin whales have bigger brains than we do by a long shot, but they're a lot bigger. And so it's useful to use a encephalization quotient, which is brain mass divided by body mass. And if you look at that, that would be the gray one. You can see humans have a higher one, and common dolphins aren't too far behind. And so the question is, where do these big brains come from, particularly in the odontocetes? And I mentioned some of it was due to this new echolocation talents required a lot of processing, and they're very social. And social demands big brains, requires big brains to figure out what the other person is doing, what they meant, how to signal. And that's one of the reasons that people think that humans wound up with big brains, is because we're social animals. And that's a very major stimulus for brain power. If you look at diagrams like this, which I love, you can see some of the skeletal changes. Here's Pachycetus, our first whale. You can see how the vertebrae change and get more numerous. They develop long spines in the lumbar and thoracic region, and they get flattened in the back, which is suggestive of a fluke. I love this one too. It shows basically, if you look about that key time, 38 million years ago is about the time when our two modern groups evolved. And here's some of the players I talked about and some of the things that happened. And these are Archaeocetes right up to here. And again, so not much has happened since 38 million years ago. In fact, if we could go back to the Miocene, we would have over double the genera that we have today. And I often wonder where I would go if I had my time machine. I mean, there's so many possibilities, but if you're a fan of mammals, you want to go back to the Miocene. Right now, we're just looking at a remnant few. Oh, I love this one. I want that one for my bedroom. What a poster. Isn't that great? This is a good one too, showing particularly changes in the hind limbs. And if you think that we lost some major players, we got rid of the mosasaurs and other marine reptiles, take a look at this guy. This was a extinct sperm whale relative with 36 centimeter teeth. Let's see, about long. Yeah. As I said, go back a few million years and you have a lot of mammals to pick from. Okay, so recapping this evolution, basically it started 50 million years ago, kind of finished up about 34 million years ago. The fossil evidence is recent, as you remember, something like Amblyocetus, 1991. All recent fossils. There's lots of transitional forms showing intermediate stages of all of the trends we talked about. I think it's the best known example of macroevolution, which is trends. Just review, hind limbs were lost. There's a gene called this PIXX1 gene, which we all have, and that controls our lower limb development. Whales still have that gene. It's just inactive. And there are some baby whales born with little hind limbs. Sometimes there's humans born with tails. These are, because we still possess the genes that we inherited from our ancestors. I talked about the four-limb flipper thing, didn't talk much about blubber, but the fresh to salt water, there's another trend. The extravertebrate and fluke. And the underwater ear, I hope if you can ask me a question later if that wasn't clear, how important that was. Dentition changes. You went from different teeth to all the same in the migration of the Nares. Blue whales, the largest animal to ever have lived, almost 100 feet long. We are lucky to share the planet with one. I'm going to show you some pictures now of just kind of like a gallery to end the talk. This is a common dolphin, as this is. You never get tired of dolphin watching. Kind of like sex, you can just do it every day. Well, not me anymore, but Anyone? This is a pilot whale, and in the bottom corner are a couple of orca, killer whales. Sperm whales. This is a fin whale, mom and calf. And they're so busy feeding, or she was so busy. You can even see, I don't know if you can see in this picture, I forgot to look, but when I was there, you can almost see it if you look at her. See, she's got her spinous processes are showing. She's been nursing. She gave birth and she's nursing. That calf, remember, is going to grow 2/3 of its size in the 1 year. So she's been nursing. She's kind of depleted. She's really busy getting some food. Didn't bother us. We could get really close and watch her lunge feed. There she is in a lunge on her side. This is a fin whale. My nephew took this picture. This is a blue whale. Here's one, you can just see the nares, the blowhole, with this little inflated area. It's called a spray skirt. So when they come up, they inflate this area so they don't get water down their nose. I like this picture. This is a blue whale. There's the nares right there. Remember, there's a lot of whale in front of that. They have this long, long snout, and the tail is right about here, and that's a 30-foot boat. So this whale is over 90 feet long. And there's a humpback doing his breaching. These are all taken down off the field station, Glendale College, which I've been working with for a number of years. This is my last slide. And so I have to tell you a story. And I revere in all life, particularly animal life. So I'm not a whale hugger. But we were down in San Ignacio Lagoon, and I was sitting in the back of the boat. The outboard motor's here, driver's over here. I'm in the back corner here. Maybe it was the other corner. It was in this corner over here. And I was back there so that other people could have access to the whales, which come up to the side of the boat. So I look over, and there's this gray whale calf comes up like this conical statue right next to me. I didn't know what to do. What would you do with a gray whale standing right next to you? I hugged it. I'm embarrassed to say, well, it let me hug it for a long time. What do you do when you hug somebody for a while? You kiss them. It was like kissing a zodiac, an inflatable. Anyway, embarrassed to tell you, I mean, I'm not a whale hugger, but I have done it. And if Terry Curtis was here, she could document that story because she was sitting in the boat with me. So anyway, so thank you. And I guess hopefully, there's time for questions. Got a few minutes for questions. So. Yes.
If one interested in going to try to do whale watching, I mean, just for the heck of it, that's kind of like a once in a lifetime thing. Let's do all the time. Where would you recommend to try to get like the best experience?
I would go to Guerrero Negro, and I would go with a company or an outfit. There's a couple places, and you just get yourself there, and they transport you to the whales. They're booked and they give you lunch. And Sandy and I have done it a couple times. It's easy, and I can give you I mean, you can go online and just, that's the easiest, closest place. Pardon me? There's many of them there. The hotel we used was the Coracolis, which is a Shell, I think. Yeah. And they were really good. Yeah, but that's something you got to do that. That's great. Right? Yeah. Yeah. Well, the Guerrero Negro is down in Baja. It's about, it's a good day, a solid day's drive from the border. It's on the peninsula. Yes, Emma.
A specific question. So do you know how missing seats have two globals and a galaxy?
Yes.
I've heard in like rural that the reason for that is because